Your body remembers what your mind has forgotten, and at 50, when you sink into the ancient horse stance, something extraordinary begins to wake up inside you. There are neurons in your legs, in your hips, in the small muscles that wrap around your spine, that have been waiting silently for years, decades perhaps, for a signal they once knew intimately. These are your proprioceptive neurons, the sensory cells that tell your brain where your body exists in space, and they have been whispering more quietly with each passing year of sitting, of walking on flat surfaces, of moving through life in predictable, minimal ways. When you lower yourself into that wide stance, knees bent, thighs parallel to the earth, weight distributed evenly through feet that suddenly must grip and stabilize, these dormant pathways flicker back to life. The science here is both elegant and humbling. Proprioception is not a single sense but a symphony of information gathering, signals streaming from muscle spindles that detect stretch, from Golgi tendon organs that measure tension, from mechanoreceptors in joint capsules that register angle and pressure. After 50, we assume these systems are in decline, that neuroplasticity belongs to the young, that the brain's ability to reorganize and strengthen its networks has somehow closed its doors. But the horse stance challenges this assumption with brutal simplicity. Hold the position, and your nervous system has no choice but to pay attention. The muscles of your thighs begin to tremble, not from weakness alone but from the computational intensity of maintaining equilibrium. Your brain is suddenly processing thousands of microadjustments per second, recalibrating balance, recruiting muscle fibers that have been unemployed, strengthening the neural highways between spinal cord and limb. What emerges over days and weeks of practice is something neuroscientists call activity-dependent plasticity. The connections that fire together begin to wire together, even in the aging brain. The cerebellum, that ancient structure at the base of your skull responsible for coordinated movement, begins to rebuild its internal models of your body. The motor cortex thickens slightly in the regions that map to your legs and core. But perhaps most remarkably, the sensory feedback loop itself becomes more sensitive, more refined. Your feet begin to feel the ground with greater detail. Your knees begin to track with more precision. The small stabilizing muscles deep in your hips, muscles you cannot consciously control, begin to fire in patterns they had abandoned. This is not merely exercise in the conventional sense. This is neurological archaeology, the excavation of capacities that seemed lost but were only sleeping. The horse stance becomes a daily practice of reawakening, a physical meditation that forces your nervous system to remember what it means to be fully embodied. The trembling in your legs is not failure but conversation, your muscles and nerves relearning a language they once spoke fluently. And with each day you hold that position, breathing through the discomfort, you are quite literally rewiring the relationship between your conscious mind and the body it inhabits, proving that at 50, at 60, at 70, the capacity for transformation has not abandoned you. When you hold the horse stance, you are not simply strengthening muscle, you are speaking directly to your skeleton in a language it understands perfectly, the language of mechanical stress. Bone is not the inert scaffolding we imagine from anatomy charts, not the dry white framework we associate with museums and mortality. Bone is living tissue, constantly remodeling itself, constantly listening to the forces you place upon it. And after 50, when the whispers of osteoporosis begin to echo through medical appointments and bone density scans, this conversation becomes urgent. The horse stance creates a very particular kind of architectural demand. Your femurs, those long thigh bones, are loaded vertically but at an angle, bent at the knee, creating compressive forces that ripple through the trabecular network inside the bone itself. This spongy inner lattice, which looks like coral under magnification, is where bone density is won or lost. The cells responsible for building bone are called osteoblasts, and they respond to one thing above all else: mechanical strain. When you stand normally, walk casually, sit for hours, the strain is insufficient to trigger their activation. But when you sink into that stance, thighs burning, body weight channeled through bent joints, you create what engineers call tensile and compressive stress. The bone bends microscopically, deforms ever so slightly, and this deformation is detected by osteocytes, the sensory cells embedded throughout your skeletal matrix. These cells send chemical signals, cascades of molecular messengers, that wake up the osteoblasts and command them to lay down new bone tissue. This is Wolff's law in action, the principle that bone adapts to the loads placed upon it, growing denser where stress is applied, dissolving away where stress is absent. What makes the horse stance particularly potent for aging bodies is the way it loads the skeleton through the hips, the spine, the very regions where fracture risk climbs steeply after 50. The pelvis must stabilize against rotational forces. The lumbar vertebrae must maintain their curve while supporting your torso. The hip joints, those ball and socket architectures that carry you through life, are compressed in a weight-bearing position that stimulates the femoral neck, the precise location where hip fractures most commonly occur. This is not impact, not the jarring stress of running or jumping that aging joints often cannot tolerate. This is sustained, controlled load, the kind that research shows can halt and even reverse bone mineral density loss in postmenopausal women and aging men. Every day you practice, you are literally rebuilding your skeleton from the inside out. The calcium and phosphate crystals that give bone its hardness are being deposited along new stress lines. The collagen matrix that gives bone its flexibility is being reinforced. Your body, which has been quietly dismantling bone faster than it builds it, a metabolic imbalance that defines aging, begins to shift its equilibrium. The horse stance becomes a daily reminder that your bones are not fixed, not finished, that architecture can be restored through patience. When your thighs begin to burn 30 seconds into the horse stance, when the trembling starts and sweat beads on your forehead despite barely moving, something profound is happening deep inside the cells of your quadriceps, your gluteal muscles, your core stabilizers. These large muscle groups, now held under continuous tension, are experiencing a metabolic crisis of the most productive kind. The muscle fibers are contracting isometrically, generating force without shortening, and this requires energy in the form of ATP, the molecular currency that powers all cellular work. As the seconds tick by and you hold that position, your muscles begin to exhaust their immediate ATP reserves, then burn through creatine phosphate, then shift into glycolysis, breaking down glucose with increasing urgency. This metabolic cascade creates a very particular cellular environment, one that triggers adaptations especially valuable for bodies over 50. The mitochondria, those ancient bacterial ancestors that live inside your muscle cells and produce energy, begin to multiply in response to this sustained demand. This process, called mitochondrial biogenesis, is governed by signaling proteins that sense when energy supply cannot meet energy demand. Daily practice of the horse stance creates repeated metabolic stress, and your muscle cells respond by building more power plants, more mitochondria to handle the load. This matters enormously for aging bodies because mitochondrial density naturally declines after midlife, contributing to fatigue, reduced stamina, and the subtle energy deficit that makes movement feel harder than it once did. More mitochondria means more capacity to generate energy efficiently, to clear metabolic waste products, to sustain effort without accumulating the lactate and hydrogen ions that create that burning sensation. But perhaps even more significant is what happens to insulin sensitivity. When large muscles contract repeatedly or hold tension, they pull glucose out of the bloodstream directly, independent of insulin. The glucose transporters called GLUT4 migrate to the cell surface, opening channels for fuel to enter. Over time, regular muscle engagement makes cells more responsive to insulin signals, reversing the insulin resistance that creeps up on aging bodies and leads toward metabolic syndrome, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. The horse stance, held daily, turns your leg muscles into metabolic sinks, hungry for glucose, actively managing blood sugar in ways that protect you from the chronic inflammation that accelerates aging itself. There is also the matter of myokines, the signaling molecules that muscles secrete when they work hard. These proteins travel through your bloodstream and communicate with distant organs, with your brain, your bones, your immune system, even your fat tissue. They reduce systemic inflammation, enhance cognitive function, promote the breakdown of visceral fat. Your muscles, when challenged consistently, become an endocrine organ, a gland that secretes health. The horse stance is not just building strength in your legs, it is transforming your entire metabolic landscape, recalibrating how your body processes energy, manages inflammation, and maintains the cellular vitality that separates vigorous aging from. There is a strange paradox in stillness under load, a cardiovascular puzzle that reveals itself when you hold the horse stance and feel your heart begin to pound despite standing motionless. Your pulse climbs, your breathing deepens, blood pressure rises in your arteries, and yet you are not running, not cycling, not moving through space at all. This is the body confronting a unique challenge, one that conventional aerobic exercise does not create. When muscles contract and hold, they compress the blood vessels running through them. The arteries and veins that normally deliver oxygen and carry away carbon dioxide are suddenly squeezed, their diameter narrowed, and your heart must push harder to force blood through this increased resistance. It is as if someone has partially closed a valve in your circulatory system, and your cardiovascular system must adapt to maintain flow against this elevated afterload. What happens over weeks and months of daily practice is a remodeling of your cardiovascular efficiency. Your heart, that tireless muscular pump, becomes better at generating pressure. The left ventricle, which pushes oxygenated blood out to your body, experiences a training stimulus similar to what happens in resistance training, a strengthening of contractile force. But simultaneously, your blood vessels themselves begin to change. The endothelial cells that line your arteries, those single-cell thick barriers between blood and vessel wall, become more responsive, more capable of releasing nitric oxide, the molecule that causes vessels to dilate and accommodate increased blood flow. This is vascular flexibility, the capacity of arteries to expand and contract dynamically, and it naturally stiffens with age, contributing to hypertension and cardiovascular disease. The horse stance creates something called occlusive training or blood flow restriction at a natural, self-regulated level. When you finally release the stance and stand up, blood rushes back into the muscles that were compressed, a phenomenon called reactive hyperemia. This flood of oxygen-rich blood stimulates the growth of new capillaries, those microscopic vessels that form the final delivery network bringing nutrients to individual muscle cells. Greater capillary density means more efficient oxygen delivery, better waste removal, enhanced endurance capacity. Your cardiovascular system is learning to perfuse tissue more effectively, building redundancy into the network, creating alternative pathways that make your circulation more resilient. But there is also a regulatory dimension to this adaptation. Your baroreceptors, the pressure sensors in your carotid arteries and aortic arch, are constantly monitoring blood pressure and sending signals to your brainstem to adjust heart rate and vessel tone. The repeated challenge of the horse stance trains these regulatory mechanisms to respond more precisely, to manage the swings between exertion and rest with greater stability. This autonomic nervous system conditioning translates into better blood pressure control throughout your day, reduced cardiovascular reactivity to stress, a more balanced interplay between sympathetic arousal and parasympathetic calm. The heart learns to do more with less effort, vessels learn to flex rather than rigidly resist, and circulation becomes not just adequate but. There comes a moment in the horse stance, perhaps 20 seconds in, perhaps a minute, when the discomfort becomes undeniable and you must make a choice about whether to stay or stand. This is not the sharp pain of injury but the deep ache of effort, the burning protest of muscles under load, the trembling that announces you are at your edge. And in that moment, something shifts in your awareness. You are no longer thinking about your day, your worries, the endless stream of mental chatter that usually occupies consciousness. You are simply present with sensation, with breath, with the raw fact of embodiment. This daily confrontation becomes a practice of returning to the body, of inhabiting physical reality rather than merely occupying it. For those of us over 50 who have watched our bodies change in ways we did not choose, who have felt the creeping sense of betrayal as joints stiffen and energy wanes, this reunion with physical presence carries profound psychological weight. The horse stance teaches patience in a way that nothing else quite can. Progress is incremental, measured in seconds added to your hold time, in the gradual steadying of that tremor, in the softening of panic when discomfort arrives. You cannot rush this adaptation. You cannot think your way into stronger legs or negotiate with physiology. You can only show up, day after day, and do the work, breathing through limitation, learning to distinguish between the discomfort of effort and the warning signs of harm. This is a meditation disguised as exercise, a daily ritual that forces you to confront impatience, to sit with the desire to quit, to discover that you can endure more than you believed. The mental resilience built here extends far beyond the stance itself, seeping into how you approach other challenges, other discomforts, other slow processes that require sustained commitment without immediate reward. But perhaps most profoundly, the horse stance changes your relationship with time and decay. We live in a culture that treats aging as a passive decline, a slow surrender to entropy, a story already written. The daily practice of holding this position, of feeling yourself grow incrementally stronger rather than weaker, of discovering capacity you thought was lost, rewrites that narrative from the inside. Your body becomes evidence that transformation remains possible, that adaptation has not abandoned you, that you still possess agency over your physical fate. This is not denial of aging but engagement with it, a recognition that while time moves in only one direction, the trajectory within that direction contains choices. Each morning or evening when you sink into that stance, you are performing an act of faith in your own vitality. You are saying that this body, with all its limitations and history, still deserves attention, still contains potential, still matters. The horse stance becomes less about fitness and more about dignity, about refusing to become a stranger in your own flesh, about maintaining the conversation between will and muscle and bone that defines what it means to be.